We're alive.
Thank you very much. We are back from a quick step on the floor. Fabulous job with that bill report, striking a sunset, Representative Boyden. Okay, we're picking up off the earlier work on age 397, and we are joined with by Doug Harm, Chief Recovery Officer, and myself and the sponsor of the bill had a conversation with him, and we are here to just get some insight and perspective from Doug on our product before us. How are you, sir?
Good, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful. So yeah, per our conversation yesterday, I'm just grabbing my file as well. Was just hoping to get insight from you on the sections that we discussed in our meeting with sponsor.
Absolutely. So for the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state of Vermont. So I would say I've started to talk with all of the agencies that are implicated by this bill, ANR, AOT, Public Safety, ACCD, to start those conversations. I haven't gotten, more detailed analysis back from them, but I wanted the committee to know we've kind of started looking at it and started having conversations about, I think there's definitely plenty of good to talk about in the bill. There's some things that may be challenging to accomplish, but I just wanted to start the conversation today. So section 1, one thing that I would note about this section, the statewide framework for flood preparedness, response, and recovery, that is part of the state emergency management plan that's in 20 VSA. And one thing from a technical perspective is that it's not apparent from the name of the state emergency management plan is the broad plan that covers all hazards planning, and it covers the preparedness, the response, and the recovery. And we're currently working with Vermont Emergency Management and Agency of Human Services to build out the individual and the recovery part of that plan. And I think that this section could be kind of reworked to reference the update in Act 143 of last year that put the state emergency management in section 41 of Title 20, and you could more explicitly build out the recovery element of that, because that state emergency management plan language is pretty high level right now, and I think we always want to approach it from an all hazards perspective, but looking at the existing language, recovery is referenced, but just in a very short way. And I think I've been working with AHS to build more out there. So I think I recognize the need for more detail in that area, and I think that's how it could potentially fit into existing statute.
Understood.
The specific areas of technical assistance, I want to look at those with Vermont Emergency Management and talk through those areas. I don't want to dive into those because I might say something like hastily on those. So I'm going to look at those different areas like the parking plans, the shelter. Like I know for a fact that there's been a lot of progress on emergency shelter plans with municipalities. And I think that we can kind of inventory what we're doing right now, where it lines up with this bill, and how that might work. So those are my main thoughts on section 1, Mr. Chair. So I'll pause there to see if there's any comments.
No. I think that, well, for myself, I think those are all perfectly reasonable positions, and just, the necessity to get more information, mine into it a little bit. I think we had this conversation at 2:30 yesterday afternoon, whatever it was. Representative Coffin.
Yeah, could you repeat the statute, what you said it may fit better into? Because I was trying to write that and it just wasn't fast enough.
Apologies. So Act 143 of 2024, so last year, Title 20, Section 41, a section called State Emergency Management Plan was created. And so I think building on that section would be the logical place to put this type of desire for a clearer framework for recovery. it already speaks fairly well to preparedness and response. But I think the way where we've struggled in the state is what is our role? What are the roles and responsibilities in medium to long-term recovery? I think there's more ambiguity there than there is in preparing for floods and preparing for wildfires and preparing for the day of and the immediate cleanup. That's all pretty straightforward work. It's how do we recover as communities that gets really tricky and challenging.
Any other hands? I know we have a scant quorum here, but yes.
Oh, no.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was a
No
great
hands.
lead to a hand. No, keep on going, Mr. Burnham.
Section 2, Mr. Chair, is financial assistance for impacted municipalities. Section A of the subsection A of that. I do agree that that is a need that Vermont needs to figure out. And I've had conversations in the past and will reopen conversations with Michael Gahn at the bond bank and with the state treasurer's office. I know that we being a collective we there of the administration with emergency board authorization deployed 5 million, and the treasurer's office working with the bond bank deployed well over 15 million for short-term lending to give municipalities more access to capital. And we all recognize it did not meet the full need. The bond bank would have information on, but I believe they were oversubscribed for those programs.
Is
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is Mr. Gahn someone that we should invite in for testimony?
Yes. I believe when you're looking at municipal finances, Mr. Gahn is an excellent expert in the field.
Okay.
And the bond bank is a separate statutorily created entity. It's not part of the administration. It really has a mission to serve municipalities in a financial advisory role.
Yes.
I know you are aware, Mr. Chair, sorry. But
no, not at all. I was just kind of affirming your point.
For B, I would say B in this, in saying that all non-federal share would be covered by the state would be a very expensive proposal. In 4720, so in the July 2023 floods, the General Assembly was more generous than we've ever been, really, in a state event. And in that case, we covered 78% of the non-federal share across the board. The normal policies for non-federal share are that the state will cover between 30% and 70%, depending on how many mitigation measures a local government has in place, kind of a carrot to adopt flood plans, to have NFIP, National Floodplain Insurance standards in place. Because we have that balance of local control, we kind of try to do that to incentivize more proactive approach to risk reduction. I do think there are reasons to revisit our Emergency Relief Assistance Fund, that rule that governs non-federal share, because we have scenarios like in Plainfield and Kirby where the need for match dramatically exceeds the grand list and the revenue raising capacity for that community. So our rule doesn't work for all situations, right? It can create a situation where there's far more match than a town could possibly address. But I don't think that the state should cover all the non-federal share. You would then have a situation where municipalities would have control of buildings and decisions, and then they would have no reason to reduce their risks because the state and the feds would be paying for any damages to those buildings. So they wouldn't have any reason to make choices to move out of floodplains or to reduce their risk or those other things. So I'm not saying the current match approach is perfect. I think it should be evaluated. But I don't think we should go to the spectrum of no municipality should have to pay non-federal share in a disaster.
I hear your point, sir.
Most disasters in Vermont are 75-25. So that 25%, actually, it's unfortunate for a number of reasons. Disasters are always unfortunate, but the 2024 floods have come in at nearly $100 million of damage, which is under the 90-10 threshold for FEMA. So there'll be a 75-25 disaster, but they'll be just under the per capita threshold and will cost the state a very significant amount of money because it's a 75-25 split. It'll almost be the most expensive disaster that can possibly occur, right below that 90-10 threshold. So I'll stop belaboring that. Any questions before I move on to section 3, Mr. Chair?
I am all set. Does anyone at the table have any questions for Mr. Carter? Oh, Representative Goffin.
Because I'm learning, we were at the 100 million. What is the threshold for the 90-10? I mean, how close were we?
It moves every year. I believe it's about 115 million for 2024. So I think it's possible we'll exceed that threshold, but I think it's very unlikely. We might slide into it at the very end after every project is negotiated, but that will likely take roughly another year or so. And so most of our decisions are happening right now based off of an assumption that it's 75-25. If I had to bet on it, I would say 95% chance we're not going to hit that threshold. Not impossible, but extremely unlikely.
Okay. Well, that helps me know.
So complicated, man. Yeah.
It is. And so if for context, under the current rule, if a disaster is $100 million disaster, the feds will pay 75 million of that likely. Based on our ERAF rule application under current state, the state would pay another 12.5 million, and then the towns collectively would pay about 12.5 million. For 4720 from July of 2023, the state signed up to pay, because it was a 90-10, for municipal damages, we estimate about 200 million. So the feds paying 180 million, the state paying roughly 18 million or 17.2, and then the town's paying about trying to do math too quickly. The town should be responsible for about 4.4 million altogether, out of that 200 million of damage. And that was with making the state responsible for 78%. Hopefully my math wasn't bad there, but it may be.
I think it was accurate enough to make the point, sir.
Thank you. All right, moving on to section 3, flood-prone properties. The voluntary buyout program. Right now, the Vermont Emergency Management did launch a state-managed buyout program, and that is run under the Community Resilience and Disaster Fund that was created. That was also created in Act Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. That was created in Act 143 last year. So if a voluntary buyout program is codified, there are kind of two things to pay attention to here. It should be aligned with that grant program. I think the grant program already contemplates buyouts, so there may be some overlap there. And the one piece of language, and the administration would help generate this exact language, but the one thing, anywhere we talk about a buyout program we'd want to put in is that if there are state requirements for a buyout, and federal funding is involved, then we are allowed to waive the state requirements to conform with the federal requirements. That way, we don't run into a situation where there's conflicting requirements and we don't feel we can move forward with a project. If we can get the federal funding, we want to be able to get that federal funding and support that project, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. It totally does. And I heard you just say that there was you folks could generate some language, sample language for us that would sort of speak to those two
Yes.
moving parts? Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I believe that I can dig up some language we used with the American Rescue Plan Act, state fiscal recovery programs that tried to balance you always follow state law unless it's a federal program and it conflicts with a federal requirement, and then you're allowed to follow the federal requirement. But we'd all be more comfortable if that was an explicit authorization by the legislature and not a decision that the administration was trying to make on its own.
Okay, understood. Yeah, as we wade through this, leaning into your vast experience with these range of disasters, emergencies we've been dealing with the last 5-6 years, and how we've navigated statute in the federal government, I certainly would welcome the help with crafting the language. So with that, anybody have any questions for that one piece?
All right.
Wonderful.
On the homeowners assistance.
Hold on one second, Ms. Spur. Representative Wood.
Just a clarifying point. Did you just reference the FRCF?
I can
Flood
explain
Resilient
that.
Community Fund? Is that funded by ARPA funds?
So, yes, Representative, the Flood Resilient Communities Fund was created by ARPA state fiscal recovery funds. And because it was created with that particular federal funding source, it had some restraints and constrictions on it. And it worked very well, though. It was an excellent use of funds by the General Assembly. Last year, we took the Flood Resilient Communities Fund concept and we moved it forward into the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, which is broader, doesn't have as much of a focus on the ARPA requirements that the Flood Resilient Communities Fund was created with. So it's a little bit more flexible, but serves the same serves the same goals of the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. I still say FRCF most of the time when I'm talking about it. I'm still learning the new acronym.
So they're like merged together, similar, work
Yes.
hand in hand. Yeah. got it.
That's the goal. And then the legislature was kind enough to appropriate, it's a lot of kindness, 12.5 million of general fund, and then allow for 26.4 million of ARPA funds that became general fund through end of year allocation processes. So that Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund currently has 38.9 million of general fund available to it. Now they've already dedicated a large portion of that to be the match for hazard mitigation projects, buyouts, primarily at this point. So a big chunk of that 38 million is going to be the non-federal share for mitigation projects. And that is an area where the state has committed for this current round to covering the entire non-federal share. Which I also don't think, I think it's the right position, but I also don't think it's a sustainable position going forward. We need to figure out a reasonable way to share costs, even if the state takes the majority. But our state funds for that program are running out quickly because we did move ahead with covering the entire non-federal share for that. So that 38 million is going quickly. And we might have roughly 8 to 10 million left over after we meet all of our share requirements to do stateside projects that don't meet federal requirements or where we've run out of federal awards to do work. In the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund, which, as you noted, is an extension of the Flood Resilient Communities Fund from ARPA. And so the homeowners assistance program that is Section 3, Part B, some elements of that are part of the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. Construction projects to elevate a residential building, that is a potential use. I would say elevations in Vermont are possible in inundation zones like Barrie. They are less possible in places like Kirby, etc., where fluvial erosion and swift water is more of the risk, because an elevation is actually just placing that household at greater risk. The second element, relocation to other permanent housing. One thing I would note here is that there are relocation benefits through FEMA. And those relocation benefits did work fairly well when someone was able to find a house to rent. So the problem wasn't in the benefit existing, it was in the home existing for a flood impacted household to move to. And so we also wouldn't want to pay for a program on the state side when a federal program existed to provide those benefits. So I think I do think availability of housing is a much bigger issue right now than paying for someone's relocation costs. So that one's a bit tricky. I do recognize that it's a need, but I do think there's a federal program that helps with that. And then the rebuilding of residential buildings, that is definitely an eligible use under the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. So I think the one thing we did when we worked with the legislature on the drafting for the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund is it's written in more of an all hazards language style. And that would be my recommendation, is to keep that path of not drafting programs specific to floods, but making so they, because if we had our first serious significant wildfires last year, and if that trend continues, we were fortunate we didn't see primary residences destroyed, but if that were to occur, we wouldn't want someone who lost their home to a wildfire being ineligible for the same treatment that someone who was flooded received, right? The disaster shouldn't matter. The impact on the household should be what matters.
No, and I totally agree with that. I mean, one of the focuses of the work with this committee with I always forget the acts. I'm terrible with the acts. S310 turned into act what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Is to look at these things like all of these major events, right? Whether it be man-made, whether it doesn't matter what the trigger is, a catastrophic event is a catastrophic event for the most part. Sure, to the all hazards point, Mr. Carter. Yes. So I think that is a very, very astute focus for us to discuss. Oh, Act 143. Thank you.
Act 143, yes.
I'll get the acts down at some point.
It might be easier if we didn't restart numbering the acts every time. Because,
Yeah.
Maybe we should put in an act to rectify the act management.
right.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's getting a little late.
Could that be your technical correction?
Oh, we could put that in a tech correct bill from earlier. Yes. Okay. Mr. Burnham, please.
All right.
The table is yours, sir.
Sections 4 and 5. I have started conversations with Agency of Transportation. These both deal with roads and road reimbursement, very complex areas that I am not as involved in. So I can't speak deeply to Section 4 or Section 5, but I can say I've started the AOT policy group working on this. So
Right along the 6th then.
should be able to have them look at it. And the one thing I'll speak to about this, maybe putting myself out on a little bit of a limb, Section 5E, with the provision of flood response fleet vehicles, I do think that is a very interesting concept. I think that is absolutely worth exploring. The parallel that we had was in July of 2023, when it was clear we needed some vehicles to help with debris management. AOT bought what they call Brawny and Bounty, and these are like picker trucks, and they were very helpful in going around and helping clean up debris around the state, where we weren't able to take on that activity in-house before, and they were extremely useful over the last several years. So I do think that 5E is definitely a concept that should be explored, because these vehicles, this machinery, it would never ever be cost effective for most of our municipalities to maintain that equipment. Little bit of exposing my bias here. It's one reason I've supported the Regional and County Governance Study Committee, is that sometimes you want to look at shared equipment. I know calm down, people. Sorry.
We're still working on it. The committee still exists. Senator Callamore and I are well aware of our duties.
Sorry. But there are definitely cases where shared resources might be the right answer in certain areas, right?
Understood.
So many cases.
Yes, Representative Ms. Hall.
I probably should have asked this question earlier when Teddy was testifying, but, or when the fire chief was here. He's made a comment that the building that is stored, it's in Colchester, correct? The old highway building,
yeah,
and the
yes,
highway
yes.
department wants it back.
No.
And, well, it's in his
Regardless.
report, yeah. That's not really a conducive central location, number one. But is there money anywhere to search for a building that might house all the vehicles?
I'm not aware of a specific charge for a citing request for this.
No, okay, all right, that's all. That's just my thought.
No, I mean, it is, they have a lot of stuff jammed into a small place, yes, but that's all part of that other conversation that we spoke to earlier. for
Right.
discussion.
Well, that in Colchester just doesn't seem like a very central location if you can't get there from here to the roads route.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
I like that as like a Vermont, you just can't get there from
can't
here.
get there from
especially if
here,
the road's
that's
out.
right. That's the Vermonter.
Nice little caveat on that one. Okay, Mr. Farnham, please proceed.
Section 6, I've started conversations with A&R. For the committee's awareness, after the floods our approach to debris, we took on a little bit more responsibility at the state level for debris after the 2023 floods. We set up a contract that municipalities could kind of opt into, and we would help with debris management. We worked on the streams a bit, but the way we approached the rivers and debris cleanup in the rivers after 2023 was largely driven by how we'd always done it. When the 2024 floods hit in July, we decided to take a much more aggressive approach to getting debris out of the rivers, because after 2023, we still thought, oh, well, we've got time to recover from this. And, but the 2024 events highlighted that, we don't necessarily have time to get all the debris out of the river that could create a threat. So Agency of Natural Resources and AOT were much more aggressive about going out and cleaning up the rivers, getting debris out of the rivers. I think in some very, very narrow cases, there was even alteration of riverbeds. I was made aware of one situation where I'm trying to remember how this was explained to me properly. I'm passing along the information, but essentially the water and the flooding was so vigorous that it destroyed the bottom of the riverbed. And then the riverbed was starting to cut down into the clay that was underneath, because it no longer had a stone riverbed to hold the river in place. So it was starting to carve.
Oh, wow, okay.
So A&R moved to remediate that situation. I don't think this is happening. I think this has happened much more in 2024 than it did in prior years. But I recognize it's not very visible to most people. We weren't, advertising that we were doing a lot of this work. But I do think that that work that we did in this section kind of overlapped quite a bit. So I think that there will be things to talk about in section 6. Section 7. This one I probably just need more time to for A&R to get back to me with their position and their thoughts on it. I think that the river corridor management and the bills that were passed last year, they're still trying to unpack what their responsibilities are there. So they'd have to align that with anything new that was passed. Section 8. I would say, from my perspective, this is a complicated area, because when we have a major disaster, we use the federal administrative dollars that come along with that disaster declaration to hire additional limited service staff, and we ramp up our section. So right now we have a large number of additional staff at Vermont Emergency Management that we've pulled on to help deal with the extra work from the floods, the 7 disaster declarations in recent years. So I think right now there wouldn't be a need for additional positions because we have pulled on all those limited service federally funded positions. But I acknowledge that when the work is done for those major disasters, those limited service positions sunset. And I think that might be a question in a couple of years of, okay, well, what's the right amount of baseline capacity for us to maintain? I think we are able to provide a high degree of service right now, only because those federal dollars are available. And that's kind of a temporary situation.
Yes. We've had several conversations about that today. Okay.
Section 9, I think Director Forand at Vermont Emergency Management would be able to speak to this very well, but we do have the VT alert system. I subscribe to it. I find it to be very valuable. And I believe I believe that system is available for the entire state, that anyone can really subscribe to it. And it might be a matter of communicating that and building buy-in, but that system does work quite well. And the last 4 events, our problems haven't primarily been in warning and notification. They have been in maintaining coordination after the disaster. And one thing that public safety and Director Forand can speak to this better than I, but because we need clarity of communications in a disaster, the Emergency Operations Center works with the local emergency management director. And then we rely on that emergency management director to communicate with the remainder of the municipality. That has varying degrees of success, that method of communication. So I do think we should always be willing to talk about how do we communicate during a disaster? Is there a way to build more redundant communications? But he leads the Emergency Operations Center when it's active, so I think he'd be excellent to have that conversation with. Section 10, I have made BGS aware of this section, and they're currently looking at it, and I will continue conversations with them on the Randall Meadow property in Waterbury.
Yeah, no, and I know that that's probably a piece that we probably want to take a look at as well, because I think that's probably a cross-jurisdictional component there. So we're going to start chatting with the folks up in that room as well.
I'll pause in case there are any questions, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, I was actually just kind of doing the same. Your heads were in the same place. I was scanning. Any questions for Mr. Farnham right now? I think this was really valuable insight up to this stage. We still have a little bit more, but yeah.
There was just there's more sections.
Yeah.
We have 2 sections left.
Yeah, no. I'm still just like, I'm at the point today where I'm like struggling to complete my own thoughts. Fragmented sentences. All right, proceed, please. Thank you.
So for section 11, the idea of doing that needs assessment, at first blush, I don't have any strong objections to that. I think depending on how conversations go with the bond bank or the treasurer, if they're going to be involved in any solutions, they could be part of that needs assessment. I don't think it's absolutely necessary that they're formally named in it, but I would certainly, for the financial elements, pull in them for their expertise. And of course, the treasurer's constitutional interest in the financial viability of our state. So that section, I don't see any major issues with. Then, of course, the effective date. And I would say that needs assessment might be important because some of the earlier sections that reference financial and technical assistance, those problems that are referenced, those issues that are referenced, depending on how they're approached, could represent billions of dollars of activity. So I think separating out, there are no concepts in this bill that I find I'm in opposition to, right? They're all good concepts. The question will really come down to what can Vermont afford to do, and how can we prioritize the actions we can afford to take.
Yes, no, certainly. And, you know, and as we spoke with the sponsor of the bill yesterday, there's also just like this awareness of this crossover calendar that we have right now too. So we are gonna have to have a couple of conversations about what we have capacity to take the appropriate amount of testimony on, so we can move forward with these pieces that we choose to identify with the appropriate amount of thought. And then work with our partners over in the Senate who are aware that this is coming, continue the conversation. So I just want to say publicly to everybody on the record that if we do find pieces that have merit and they are removed just because we do not have ample time to vet them thoroughly with confidence, that we will work with Senator Callamore and his committee when they take the bill up under there. So I just want to make that abundantly clear to everyone that it's just there's a lot of calendar awareness going on right now. So no, thank you very much, Mr. Farnham. Does anybody have any questions through the formal, I guess we call it a walkthrough with him? We've got some notes here, and if you and your team want to like offer any proposed language on those components that we've spoken to through here, then it's very much welcome. We are tomorrow. Let me take a look at the schedule. It's already get towards the end of the week. We are at boom. Yes, no, we're not even taking this up until we return from break. So we have time to work on isolating what we're gonna work on and refining the language. So we'll work with our notes. Anything that you wanna kind of try and hone in for us for our discussion would be fabulous. And I will speak with the sponsor of the bill. And Representative Boyd has graciously offered to help me with this as well. So thank you so much, Representative Boyd. Last call from Mr. Farnham.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Appreciate you. All right, folks. That was really, really dense.